Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, blessings, and mercy of God be upon you. This is another presentation from www.central-mosque.com and from the Humble Heart YouTube channel about the upcoming month of Ramadan, and we pay something which is called Fitrana, Sadaqatul-Fit'r. What is it? How is it calculated? And so on. So once again, what we'll do is we'll go through this presentation in a very systematic manner and cover all bases. How is it calculated? What is it? And so on. So first of all, the terms. There are many different terms used. In our Indian Pakistani context, we use the term Fitrana or Fitra interchangeably. Sometimes it's also called Sadaqatul-Fit'r, Zakatul-Fitr. Another term, Fidya, which is not completely equivalent, but we'll talk about it. So all of these terms are used. For the rest of the duration of this presentation, because it's easier and we use this colloquially, I will use the term Fitrana, but it's the same thing. So it's basically the charity that you give during Ramadan. It's not zakah. It's not an obligation charity, which is 2.5%. It's not that. You give it because if you inadvertently make some mistakes in your fasting, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all, that's what this Fitrana is. But there's many different terms. This fifth one, Fidya, is a different term, but sometimes it's also used, and I'll explain what fidya is, but you'll see all of these used interchangeably. Now, how is it calculated? A lot of people are confused that certain mosques sets it very low, certain mosques sets it very high, or one charity sets it very low, one charity sets it very high, and so on and so forth. So what is it? It is just like fasting is based on the Quran and the Sunnah, and zakah is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Fitrana is also based on the Quran and the Sunnah. It's not something that you randomly pluck. So some brothers and sisters say, you know what, that mosque sets is so low, it's not even equal to a burger. It's got nothing to do with a burger or a meal. It is something which is in the Quran and the Sunnah. So where does it actually come from? Both of these ahadith come from Sahih Bukhari. Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu narrates the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, enjoyed the payment of one sa of dates and one sa of barley as zakat al-fitr on every Muslim slave or free, male or female, young or old, and ordered that it be paid before the people went out to offer Eid prayer. Second hadith is similar, except that Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu mentions that Sahaba later gave 2 mud, half sa of wheat in place of dates and barley. So in the Hanafi madhab, this is compulsory to be given by people who are able to fast and their dependents, by the husband and then the wife. So if the wife should discharge it herself. It's a very small amount, but if the husband discharges it on her behalf, it is done. So remember this, how much it is actually comes in hadith. It's not something that you pluck out of thin air, how much you go out to your shop and how much is a burger or how much is a combo meal or something. No, it's mentioned in hadith, which is half sa of wheat and 1 sa of other grains. Now, last thing I want to emphasize on this slide is the Quran and the Sunnah says that this collection of fitrana should be spent the same way that you spend zakah money. So be very careful. Don't just give it to a random person and you have no idea how it's spent. Use a reputable charity. So if you live in the West or if you live in the United Kingdom, then basically Ummah Welfare Trust is a very good source. You can give it to them or you can give it to Wifaqul Ulama, and they spend it the same way zakah is spent. The added benefit of Wifaqul Ulama is they have a guarantee that your zakah or your funds are spent in United Kingdom, in the country, on the needy within the country. So that's up to you, but pick the right charity of your choice. Make sure it is spent to the right people. So first of all, you have to follow, just like when you're fasting or you're reading Taraweeh or you're reading Quran, you're following the injunctions in the Quran and the Sunnah. When it comes to Fitrana, you also have to follow the injunctions of the Quran and the Sunnah. So this amount, half sa of wheat. First difference of opinion among scholars is you read the hadith and the word that's mentioned is wheat. So a lot of scholars insist that it has to be calculated based on the price of wheat. The other scholars, they say, look, in our times, people don't use wheat, they usually use flour. Nobody buys wheat, then grinds it, then makes flours out of it, then makes bread and feeds their children. They usually buy flour. And flour is cheap. Wheat is expensive. Google it, check it up. You use wheat in some specialized foods when you're cooking, but wheat is expensive. Secondly, this word, it's a tongue twister. It's kind of difficult to pronounce for some people. It's sa, swad, alif, ain. So basically, think of an English word saw. It's quite similar to it, but it's a tongue twister. Saw. So for wheat, it's half saw of flour. A lot of scholars believe that we should be given it based on flour because that's what we use in our times. We no longer use wheat. Other scholars, they insist, they say because the hadith specifically mentions wheat. So that's the first difference of opinion amongst scholars. Understand it. Follow the best trusted scholars of your choice. Secondly, what is this saw? How much is it? So obviously half is half, multiplied by 2 becomes 1. So 1 saw is double of that. It is not a weight. So right now when we go and buy some stuff, whether you're buying flour, you're buying dates or barley, you have some kind of measurement for weight. So if I tell you I need 1 kilo of wheat flour, whether you buy it in England or whether you buy it in Pakistan or whether you buy it in South Africa, 1 kilo is 1 kilo. It's a standard measurement. However, the original saw is a volume, which means length, weight, height. You take a container, you take a box of some kind, fill it up, and that's what it was. So imagine if I go to your house and I tell your kids, you know what, take a box, go to the kitchen, fill it up with flour, bring it back. Your kids will find any old box, they'll fill it up. So the scholars had to interpret what was that volume in the time of Sahaba radiallahu ajma'in and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only that, and even in different localities. For example, if they were in Medina, what kind of box, what kind of container were they using? If they were in Kufa, what kind of container they were using? If they were in Basra, what kind of container they were using, and so on. So that's why this measurement, when converted to weight, because we use weights in our times, it differs. So the scholars in the Hanafi madhab believe the half sa is from 1.10 kilogram on the lower end to 2.32 kilogram, which is on the highest end, and somewhere in between. It falls somewhere in between. Because I've seen a lot of scholars prefer 1.75 kilograms, so one sa is 1.75 kilograms. Half a sa, sorry, is 1.75 kilogram, and one sa is double of that, which is 3.5. I will prefer this measurement of 1.75 just for the sake of convenience, but understand that you may be following some scholars who have a difference of opinion, which is fine. So how did we get here? Because they're trying to convert a volume, a container, into what it's supposed to be weight in our times. So far we've discussed two differences of opinions, wheat versus flour. We've considered the conversion of between volume and box. Third is the hadith talks about 3 or 4 different kinds of grains. It talks about dates, it talks about wheat, it talks about barley, and it talks about raisins. So your mosque or your scholar might be preferring a different opinion. For example, Maulana Tariq Jamil, he's quite adamant. He believes that it should be calculated based on raisins. So you can use any of those provided that you use the right weight, and we will talk about that in a minute. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you is in the old days, they used to distribute these grains as it is. So poor people, and I've seen it myself in some countries when I'm traveling, that on right before Eid Salah, people bring their grains and poor people come and people put grains in there. So they put wheat or raisins or whatever grains itself. We can't do that living here in the West. So it is the opinion of Imam Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, the cash equivalent of that should be given. So if you think that it is 1.75 kilograms of wheat flour, then whatever wheat flour you're doing, multiply that into pounds, and that's the amount. So imagine if your mosque says that it should be 3 pounds per person based on wheat flour average. It's a scale depending on the financial ability. So you don't have to use the cheap flour or regular flour. You can use ajwa dates for calculations as well. Let me give you a more specific example. So I asked this Mufti a question. I said, imagine, how should we give it? So he goes, the flour that you normally use at home, look at the price of it, multiply that by 1.75, and that's your fitrana. So I asked a question. I said, what if a person goes and finds the cheapest flour they can find in the market, multiplies that by 1.75 and pays Fitrana, he goes, that obligation is discharged. So of course you're being disingenuous, you're not being sincere and honest, and you're being cheap. However, your obligation is discharged. That's the answer he gave me. So I'm just giving you two massive scales, an example of two different extremes. So this person, so in 2020 in United Kingdom, I found this on there's a grocery store in United Kingdom called Asda, and their cheapest flour is 30 pence per kilo. Multiply that by 1.75, and your fitrana comes out to be 0.53 pence. So this Mufti Saab's opinion is, although this person's cheating and they're Googling and finding the cheapest flour, he says the obligation is discharged. On the other hand, I looked at the most expensive ajwa dates and I found this in Amazon at 33.98 per kilo. Multiply that by 3.5, because remember wheat is 1.75, barley, raisin, and date are 3.5 kilos, and that fitrana comes out to be 118.93, the cash equivalent of that. So remember, according to Imam Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, and majority of the world and scholars, they follow this opinion, Imam Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, that you can pay cash equivalent of it. So the range is massive, from 0.53 pence in 2020 to 118.93. So depends. So the scholars that say that basically if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you, so even though, let's imagine that if your mosque is set it to £3 per person, now you know where you got this from. You go to your kitchen, you find the flour that you're using, multiply that by 1.75, and that's your fitrana. But you don't have to. You can give it based on any of these. You can give it based on dates, barley, raisins, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Just remember one thing, you're supposed to give it from the start of Ramadan until Eid Salah. Now, it's a tradition in many mosques that people say, give fitrana. So people think they have to give this fitrana right before Eid Salah. That's not true. As soon as Ramadan starts, give it as quickly as you can. So whichever charity you give it to, they have the chance to discharge this, and it goes and be given to the poor people who can then spend it properly. Last thing is fidya. So I asked one of the scholars, I said, this whole thing, so why do you set it so low based on flour? He said the reason being is in the Hanafi madhab, if a person is unable to fast and then they're unable to regain sufficient strength to be able to fast, then for each fast that they miss, they have to pay fidya, which is the same as fitrana. So he goes, imagine, in our community, there are a lot of old people who are unable to fast because of health conditions. We have people who are diabetic, who are unable to fast, and they have to pay fitrana. So that's why we set it low. So the people, imagine if the person has missed 120 fasts. So if we set it towards the lower end, then they can discharge their 120 pounds, or for 2 years 240, and for 3 years, so on and so forth, depending on what it is. He says they can discharge all this amount, and so they won't be sinning. He goes, those who have more money, that's no problem. They don't have to give £1 or £2. They can base it on raisins or dates, and they can discharge a higher amount. In fact, he goes, it is encouraged in Islam for them to spend more money. But he goes, the reason for setting this amount lower is for people in the Hanafi madhab who have to pay fidya, so they won't be sinning because of it. So let me recap. So the amount is in wheat, 1.75 kilograms. So you go to your kitchen, find out how much your flour costs, times it by 1.75. That's your fitrana job done. If you want to do it on barley, go to your nearest grocery store or even search online wherever you shop. Times that by 3.5. Raisins, this is the opinion of Maulana Tariq Jamil. He insists on it quite a lot. So you take raisins, whatever raisins you use at home, times it by 3.5. If you have, Allah has blessed you even more, take dates, get the most expensive dates or whatever dates you're using, times that by 3.5 kilograms. Whatever's the currency, pounds, dollars, rupees, give it in which, or rands, give it whatever it comes out to be. The reason the scholars set it lower, as I've told you, is because in the Hanafi madhab, those we have a lot of people who are unable to fast for whatever reason, so they can discharge and not be sinful. You don't have to take it. Lastly, as I started by saying, some people arbitrarily saying it's the price of a meal. It isn't the price of a meal. The hadith very specifically tells you what it is. You've got to convert it. Go to scholars who help you convert it, and then pay the cash equivalent of it. Lastly, repeating myself, give it to a charity which spends it just like zakah. You cannot give it to a random charity or mosque who starts to build toilets with it or extends your masjid or puts a carpet in the mosque or something like that. No, you have to give it to a charity which takes responsibility and spends it just like zakah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.